Jerren Corrupted Bishop has 3 abilities, and all of them can be built around. The first one, though, is what we are going to be building our deck about today the most. Whenever it enters, you lose a life, and you create a 1/1 white human token creature. Or whenever another non-token human you control dies, you also lose a life and create a 1/1 human token. Okay, the second ability, pay 2 to give lifelink to a human. And the last ability is, when you have 13 life exactly, you pay 6, you transform him into Armendal, the Corruptor, Flammable lifelink, sack a creature, draw a card. That's pretty good, and that might happen during the game organically. We can manipulate it to some extent, but it's not going to be our focus for the deck. We're not going to try to get to 13 life from 40 life as soon as possible. If it does happen and we're close to 13, then we can manipulate a little bit and turn it to the other side and have a good time, because it's a good creature for sure. But that's not going to be our focus. We're going to try to create as many tokens as possible. That's going to be our main strategy. Create as many tokens as possible, go wide, and utilize those tokens to create a win condition. So what is that win condition going to be? When we have amassed a lot of tokens, that's going to be the first point in this deck tech. Okay, we have Zulaport Cutthroat. If we have a lot of tokens, we can sack them, and the opponent, or each opponent, is going to lose a bunch of life. The gaining of life is not going to be as important, but there are some synergies with life as well. But that's not the main strategy of the deck. Similar to Bastion of Remembrance, it's a very similar effect. Grey Merchant of Asphodel, also known as Gary, can drain the opponents for a bunch, regardless of tokens, but that helps get their life totals down so that the drain finishes them off, or Gary can finish them off after you've drained them. The bats, whenever you create or sack a token, each opponent loses a life. So now creating and sacking tokens can be a win condition. When you have a lot of tokens, then each of them have extort. And with Pontiff of Blight, you can just cast a couple of spells that is going to drain your opponents out in no time. Conrad the Grim, I think it's a very good addition to the deck. It has a lot of synergy, I think, with the deck, because it pings opponents when a creature dies. And it has other abilities, other triggers, like when a card is put into a graveyard. That doesn't work with tokens, but it's like an extra ability that's going to help bring life totals down a bit when a creature leaves your graveyard also, which is also something that happens in this deck a lot. It's going to deal damage to each opponent. And it has the ability to mill a card, but probably we're not too interested in that unless life totals are really, really low. But as you can see, Sir Conrad has a lot of abilities that synergize with our commander, plus Sir Conrad deals damage instead of making opponents lose life, which is something important because we can give lifelink to humans, and Sir Conrad is a human. If you give Sir Conrad lifelink with Jerren, then each damage to each opponent is going to be a lot of life for you as well. Finally, we have the Meep, which is a new addition from Doctor Who. It has ward pay 3 life, and when it attacks, you can sack another creature, and then all your tokens become base power and toughness XX, where X is sacrificed creatures mana value, not power, mana value. So you sack a Pontiff of Blight or Sir Conrad the Grim, and everything is a 5/5. Everything is 6/6. Everything is a 4/4. All the tokens that you've created. So those are some of the ways that we can utilize the tokens to win the game. How do we create the tokens? Well, Bastion of Remembrance, remember, it's in our win condition, but also it creates a token when it enters. So it helps with that. Orcish Bowmasters is a ridiculous card, but it happens to also create a token, so welcome to the deck. Chittering Witch creates black rats equal to the number of opponents you have, so a lot of tokens there. Orzhov Enforcer, when it dies, it's a human. When it dies, it's going to create another human token from the commander, but it's also going to create a spirit token from its afterlife ability. Some of these creatures are humans, like the Chittering Witch is also a human, so she triggers the commander upon entering. Doomed Dissenter, also a human. It creates a token when it dies. Woe Strider creates a goat token, and it's also a sack outlet. Sathrid Necromancer creates zombies when any human, any other human, or itself dies. And Easterling Vanguard creates an orc token when he dies. Gothmog, Morgun Lieutenant, is gonna create also an orcs, an amass orcs token, and gives tokens Death Touch. And Ophiomancer creates a bunch of tokens because it creates one on each upkeep. It also happens to be a human, so it triggers our commander. So all of these create additional tokens. We're not going to depend solely on our commander for the tokens. So these are some additional ways where we can create tokens. Remember, the strategy is to create as many tokens as possible as soon as possible. And this is going to help with that. Our next category is what I called sackable humans. Remember, our commander needs to sack non-token humans. So we need humans that want to be sacrificed, and this is the category where we are. Some of them we've seen already because they create tokens, like the Chittering Witch and Gothmog, Morgul Lieutenant, and Easterling Vanguard. But there's also Bloodsoaked Champion, which can be returned from the graveyard, and it has some combos actually. Demon's Disciple. It's itself some sort of sack outlet, because you can sack a creature, probably itself though, because it's a human. It wants to be sacrificed itself, but you can sack other things. Try not to sack the tokens though. We want to keep the tokens for later, for our win condition. Try to sack non-token creatures always, and non-token humans preferably. Like Novice Occultist, when it dies you draw a card and lose a life. She wants to be sacked. Orzhov Enforcer, we already saw, create a token when it dies. We also have Disciple of Perdition, which is a card that I saw on EDH Rec, and I thought it's not really good because you're not going to have 13 life most of the time. Well, ignore that part. That's not the important part. The important part is it's a human and you draw a card and you lose a life when it dies. That's it. The other ability doesn't really matter. Dogged Detective. This is a good one. This is a card that I like in general, and I haven't been able to put in a deck, so I was really excited to test it and try it here. I think it's really good. It's a 2-mana, surveils 2 when it enters. So that alone, I think it's very good value. It's like, imagine Scry 2 on a 2-drop. That's really good. It's almost draw card. And whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, you can return it from your graveyard to your hand. So it has a lot of recursion. You can sack it over and over again and scry a bunch of times. Plague Crafter, very similar to Demon's Disciple, where you want to probably sack it itself, if not another human that is not a token. Tenacious Underdog, similar to the Dogged Detective, is something that you can recur. You can play multiple times, hopefully with the Blitz ability. If you don't have a sack outlet, you can even Blitz it, and it's going to sack itself. It's going to draw you a card, replace itself, and you can do it every turn if you want to. And Doomed Dissenter, when it dies, creates a zombie. We already saw it in the previous section. So those are some sackable humans we need to bear in mind. We have 12, so you should at least get one in the early game. It's very important to get a sackable human and one card from our next section, which is sack outlets. Humans are food in this deck. They are not friends. You want to sack them and get tokens, and then utilize the tokens to win the game. So to that effect, we have Braids, Arisen, Nightmare, which only sacks one thing a turn, but it's still pretty good. It also draws cards. Skull Climb is crazy in this deck and many other decks. It's just a crazy card. Crazy good, that is. Chittering Witch, which we already saw in the token creation section. Notice that the card performs several functions. She is also a sack outlet. You can pay 2 and sack a creature to get a -2/-2 onto another creature. So she's a sack outlet, a token creator, and happens to be a human. It's triple synergy. It's one of the most synergistic cards in the deck. Visitor Seer, an old favorite, 1 mana, infinite sack outlet, free, Scries. Fell Stinger. It can exploit a creature, which can be a non-token human, and you draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. Same with Vulture's Haven. Exploit a creature, draw 2 cards. Hopefully a non-token human. High Market is a land. It can function as a saccable. Same for Phyrexian Tower. Plunder Forbidden. You can draw a bunch of cards, sack a bunch of creatures. These are one-off effects. In the case of the lands, at least you can use it once per turn. We also have a Whisperblood Liturgist. Sack 2 creatures, return a creature to the graveyard, from the graveyard, sorry, to the battlefield. Woe Strider has some recursion, has escape, and it also makes tokens. But it can also be used as a Viscera Seer type effect, where you sack a creature, scry 1. It has to be another creature in the case of Woe Strider, though. And Yawgmoth, probably the best of the bunch here, where you just pay a life, sack another creature, draw a card, and you also put a -1 counter on another creature. This card is busted. The next section is combos, and we have a combo, for example, with Ashnod's Altar, with Nim Death Mantle and Orzhov Enforcer, where we can sack the Enforcer plus the token to the altar, create 4 mana, or generate 4 mana that we're going to use to pay the 4 for Nim Death Mantle's ability, and attach Nim Death Mantle to it and return it to the battlefield and do it again, over and over again. Orzhov Enforcer being a human means that if your commander is out, it's going to generate an infinite amount of tokens. Another combo that is very similar is with Woe Strider instead. And basically any creature that generates a token when it enters, you can do this, except it's not a human, so you will need something else to benefit from it. But there are many things in the deck, as we saw in the WinCon section, that can trigger when a creature dies and ping our opponents to death. Okay, so there's another one with Orcish Bowmasters in a similar fashion, because it creates a token when it enters, and Chittering Witch as well. A slightly different one with Ashnod Altar, Pitiless Plunderer, and Reassembling Skeleton, or Bloodsoaked Champion. Either of those cards can return themselves from the graveyard to the battlefield, but you need colored mana. So Pitiless Plunderer is going to help by creating a treasure every time you sack it, and Ashnod Altar is going to generate the colorless mana. So with both, you can generate probably infinite mana and infinite triggers. In the case of the Bloodsoaked Champion, it's a human, so it combos with your commander for infinite tokens. In the other case of the skeleton, you need a different payoff, but you do generate infinite colorless mana with these combos. To round up our deck, we have other categories of more generic mono black deck stuff, like Phyrexian Reclamation, which gives us recursion, like Witch of the Moors, which is not generic, I agree, but it has recursion in general, and it has some synergy with the lifelink our commander gives to humans. It's also human. Then we have ramp, mostly in the form of creatures. There's Sword of Feast and Famine in there, because why not? It's just a good generic card. Extraplanar Lens, and trying to generate a lot of mana with the deck, like Cryptghast, trying to generate tons of mana. Black is really good at doing that. Cabal Coffers, Cabal Stronghold. Some protection with Malakir Rebirth, although I think our commander is not going to be a target, because it doesn't look threatening. So I don't expect people to kill it a lot. We have a lot of recursion from the graveyard to bring him back if needed. We have a lot of mana to pay for the commander tags. He's really cheap. That's not going to be a problem. But Malakir Rebirth is nice because it's a land, first of all, on the other side, and triggers its ability again. Remember, the commander triggers when it enters, not only when a human dies, not only when a non-token human dies, but also when it enters. So this is sort of a blink effect, if you will. It's just one-off, so it's not like the real strategy of the deck, but I thought it was nice. For interaction, we have Soul Shatter, Toxic Deluge, Karn to deal with artifacts, Dictate of Erebos is going to be very synergistic with our deck and the tokens. And it's going to be a headache for some decks to deal with. Crypt Rats can also deal damage to players, so it can finish off players' life totals, not only kill creatures. So this is sort of a sneaky win condition as well. And then we have some card draw in cards like Dusk Legion, even though it's not a human, but it provides some nice, a nice body that can draw you a card. And Grim Haruspex, Solemn. Species Specialist is really good in the deck because you can choose human, and a lot of humans are going to trigger it. Morbid Opportunist is just generically better, as well as Midnight Reaper, just generically better, is going to draw from any type of card that dies, any type of creature that dies, as long as it's non-token. Species Specialist lets us sack tokens if we need to draw cards. Hopefully that's not going to happen because we want the tokens to survive, but if we need to draw a couple of cards by sacking a token to move the deck along, then we'll do it. This is how the lands look. We have Bojuka Bog, Cabal Stronghold. We have Urborg, Tome of Yawgmoth to generate a lot of mana with Cabal Coffers, and we can use that mana to put it into the mana sinks like the Phyrexian Reclamation we mentioned earlier, and create a bunch of loops where we sack a creature, probably a human, create a token, get it back from the graveyard, and do it again. And if we have a lot of mana, we can do it many times and create a lot of tokens that way. Westvale Abbey is there because that's the OG Ormondal, and we could use the tokens to create the 9/7 creature if that's what you want to do. I don't think it's better than the original plan, but if things go awry, a Knight 7 Flying Lifelink Indestructible Haste might be just what you need to win the game. Okay, and lastly we have a couple of tutors. Diabolic Intent, which is also a sack outlet, and Expedition Map to get that sweet Cabal Coffers and get us some extra mana. Also in the acceleration portion we have Drivnod, which doubles the triggers on the commander, so create more tokens, and not only the commander, right, anything that dies, which there is a lot in this deck, so it's going to trigger everything twice. In the considering section we have Nadir's Nightblade, which is another win con possibility, although it only counts tokens that leave the battlefield. Upon Ulamog, if you want to create even more tokens. Roaming Throne I decided against because even though it doubles the trigger of the commander, it costs 4 more than the commander, and you want this first before playing the commander, otherwise it's not as good, and it's only going to double the triggers of humans, whereas Drivnod, which is in the deck, doubles the dying triggers of everything, regardless of creature type. Demonic Tutor, if you want to focus on the combo win cons, you can add, but I didn't add it. I didn't feel it was necessary. I did add the other tutor because it's also a sack outlet. And we have Horn of Gondor as well, which is a way to create more tokens, which I thought it could be a good idea to add, but I didn't really find space for it. Orchestra's Monument is not very good. It helps create tokens, but the other ability of reducing costs does nothing in our deck, so probably not great. And that's it for the deck. You can check out the link in the description below for the full deck list and the primer if you want to take a look at that. I play tested the deck a lot, and what I found is that sometimes by turn 6 you can have a combo assembled where you can create infinite tokens or drain for infinite life, or by turn 7 or 8 enough tokens and effects to create a winning condition. Like in this case we have a bunch of mana, a bunch of tokens, and Mirkwood Bats in hand. We can play Westvale Abbey as our sack outlet the bats as our win condition. Pay 5 and sack the abbey, or sack and transform the abbey by sacking 5 tokens or 5 creatures. Doesn't have to be tokens. Let's say we sack that, this, plus 3 tokens. Plus we can extort the bats. And we can play Phyrexian Reclamation. So far we have spent 14 mana. This generates 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mana before we flip the Abbey. That's 6 mana right there. We can use the 5 to flip the Abbey. And we have 1 floating, say for Phyrexian Reclamation. And then 4 for the bats. Plus 1 to extort it. And 1 more to extort the Phyrexian Reclamation. And we are draining our opponents for like 12 before attacks on turn 7. We're going to create 2 tokens, actually 3 tokens from this dying. And we're going to create 3 more tokens from this dying. So that's another 12. So we're draining the opponent for 24 now. Sadly, we don't have a free sack outlet where we can sack something else. But after draining each opponent for about 24, we can move to attacks and swing the tokens, and either they are going to deal damage from combat or they're going to die and drain the opponent for a bunch more.